All right, it's 3 o'clock. I'll call the meeting of the Urban Design Commission May 22nd to order, and I'll ask the staff to call the roll.
Lee Peoples.
Here.
Anthony Black.
Here.
Jorge Charnico.
Here.
Matt Guillory.
Here.
Tyler Holmes. Sarah Miller. Toon Nguyen.
Here.
Marcus Uday. James Farnham. You have a quorum.
Thank you. We have no cases withdrawn. I understand we do have a continuance request.
Yes. Item 6A, they had some people that need to be here for them on their side, then they were not able to make it today. And their first availability is the July 24th meeting, so they've requested a continuance to the July 24th meeting.
All right. Do we have a motion to approve a continuance to July 24th?
I'll move that item 6A UDCCA 19-00010 be continued to the July 24th meeting? June 24th meeting?
July 24th.
July 24th meeting.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
All of those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that is continued to July 24th. Yeah, sorry about that. The minutes of the April 24th meeting are in your packet. Do we have any changes or corrections to those minutes? We have a motion for approval.
Motion.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, the minutes are approved. Next, we have consent docket 5A, UDCA 19-9. Would anyone like to call this item up for discussion? All right, no discussion on that consent item. We'll move, we have 6A has been continued. We'll move. Okay, we need to approve the consent docket. All right, we have a motion to approve the consent docket.
I'll move to approve the consent docket.
Second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All of those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, the consent docket is approved. 6A was continued. 7A is our ordinance, and staff will discuss this ordinance for us.
Hello. If you were at the January 25th Committee Commissioner Training Workshop, I presented a brief introduction to the small cells ordinance, as we've been calling it, of the initial development of it, and I explained then that we would be working on it over the spring and that I would be coming back to all of the design review committees to further explain it and to get recommendation to Planning Commission so it can get to City Council and be approved. So that's where we are today. So a lot of what's in the presentation today is identical to what you saw in January. So if you think you've seen it before, you have, but there has been quite a bit of development. And the action for the Commission today is we're asking for you to recommend it to Planning Commission. So what are small wireless facilities? They are small, we call them monopoles, with this image on the far right is it. It's a pole between 30 and 50 feet tall. It supplements the coverage and capacity of larger cell towers. So they're smaller, lower to the ground, and to get the coverage needs, because they're so small, they can be populated in smaller coverage areas than the regular cell tower. We don't have one installed in in any of the design review districts yet. We have approved several already. So I don't have a picture of an existing one to show you, but this is an excerpt from a previous application showing, its approximate height. It is just a pole. It has various places for the antenna and what have you. This is a similar example from another municipality. So why are we even talking about these things? Last year, Senate Bill 1388 passed, and it went into effect in November of 2018. And that Senate bill did a couple of things. It allowed small cells in rights-of-way across the state. So it basically said they are permitted, they are allowed. The cities can't ban them from the right-of-way. It established them as a permitted use, so we can't say that they're not a permitted use. They are. There were a few small cell cases on Downtown Design Review and HP Commission early in 2018 where the committee had a really hard time trying to allow these because they saw them as visually obstructive and physically obstructive, and that was before the law went into effect. So the law says we're not arguing about whether or not they're allowed. They are allowed. But it also, thank you to the effort of our municipal counselor's office who worked on this with several other municipalities, the ordinance did include, the Senate bill did include some provisions for municipalities to regulate these things. So because the Senate bill did open up a window for municipalities to establish guidelines, we wanted to take the opportunity to do that. So our approach was that the Senate bill said that municipalities can establish, quote, reasonable and objective guidelines. And that part of the test for that is if these guidelines apply to everything else in the right-of-way, that we can't single out the small cells, that, park benches, light poles, everything in the right-of-way, if it's all treated the same, then the small wireless facilities can be treated along with those. So we wanted to establish some guidelines. We wanted to encourage co-location because the fewer poles, the better, obviously, and there are a lot of practical limits on co-location, but we at least wanted to be on record that if you can co-locate, that'll make our design review process easier. And then we've done a lot of outreach with the wireless providers, specifically Verizon and AT&T. We don't have these guidelines in the ordinance yet, but we have been processing applications over the past year, and that has given staff and the wireless providers a great opportunity to test what requirements work on both ends, and a lot of what we have mutually agreed to, we've incorporated into this ordinance. So an overview of the code revisions. We wanted to establish, obviously, that review of the small wireless facilities is required, that it's required as a CA. We needed to make all the design districts consistent because currently not all of them have the same streetscape guidelines, and if there were districts that didn't have the same streetscape guidelines, it's hard to regulate things in the streetscape if you don't have any guidelines. So I'll get into more detail on that in a minute. And like I said, in the goal of being reasonable and objective, we've added a few other guidelines that apply to all streetscape elements. So here's the map of the design districts. You know that pretty well. We finally have a new map with Lincoln Boulevard shown on it. all of the design districts. So this ordinance applies to all of the design districts. Historic preservation, their streetscape guidelines are in a supplemental resource called the Design and Sustainability Standards. So those updates will track to HP separately, not in an ordinance update, just in an update to their supplemental guidelines. So most of the provisions are common to every single one of these districts. One, to require that small wireless facilities need a CA, authorize staff to review them, require a CA if you replace a pole. One reason staff believe that was important is if there's an existing pole and you want to replace it, that if that existing pole is in the wrong place or in the wrong color, we wanted an opportunity to update it. Exempt the installation of additional equipment on existing poles. That was toward the point of promoting co-location. Then we, in the code right now, there's a list of amenities like benches, trash cans, light poles, and we added small wireless facilities to that list to make it clear that they are all being evaluated against the same criteria. More provisions come into all districts. Some districts had language about not impeding the pedestrian exiting from vehicles. We've made sure that provision is everywhere, because you don't want someone opening a car door into a park bench or into a small wireless facility. Guidelines to match the material. We're saying if you're in a block with all black poles, then the wireless facilities, they need to be black also. Specifically, the wireless providers asked us to make it clear that we're talking about the poles, because they do have other equipment like the radar, for example, that might be a galvanized color, not black, but we are talking about the pole. And making clear that no suspended component should be less than 8 feet above the sidewalk. Again, the whole point was just to get, clear sidewalk path, that you won't trip over anything, you won't run into anything, and you won't hit your head on anything. Then 3 districts didn't have very strong streetscape guidelines to begin with. So in order to regulate things within the streetscape, we needed to beef those up a little bit. And one of those is urban design. I was going to read specifically what that is. The urban design ordinance is in 2 pieces. One is for Tract 5, which is the Paseo Commercial District. And we're adding language, the same language as everywhere else, but it's in different places. Poles match the same color, amenities installed so that nothing hangs less than 8 feet, and that where parking is provided, the amenities should be spaced so they don't impede passengers, and that where we have angled parking, the amenities are located so that they don't impede the vehicle overhangs. That's in Paseo, and then in the broader urban design overlay, it's the same item, just in a different place in the code. But we, in the overall urban design language, we added language that's in other districts, like sidewalks should be maintained free of any obstructions, landscaping and pedestrian amenities should be placed at least 18 inches from the back of the curb. We identified what the amenities are: signage, transit stops, bollards, small wireless facilities, street trees, and then the language about parking, not impeding parking, poles, and the color and location of the poles, and the 8-foot clearance. then, yeah, I explained, so HPs will have the same requirements, but adopted as a revision to this document. So it's going to back up, so all of these things, provisions common to all districts, all of this language is in the ordinance, it's being inserted into all of the districts, but it's in various places. It's not, all the design review ordinances came online at different times, so they're formatted differently, but all of this information is in there. It's just in different places in all the districts. So update HP. Then our schedule is to come to design review. This is the second design review committee I've presented to, and I'll go through June to all the other ones. Hopefully we can be at Planning Commission by the end of the summer, and then City Council toward the beginning of the fall. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions and back up to things. I know I went pretty quickly.
Any questions?
Yeah, will the ordinance apply to any areas outside of the design districts or only in those design districts?
Only design districts, but there will be these in all over the city, but this ordinance is just for the design review districts.
So then they wouldn't have any design guidelines to follow, particularly when it comes to like matching existing colors of poles or anything like that anywhere else in the city?
Correct.
Got a question. So I noticed that in the Asian district, which is different from all the other districts, we have green light poles.
I'm sorry?
We have green light poles instead of black light poles, and so how would this guide
I believe we've asked for green before. I think the choices are black, silver, or wood. Are the only colors that the cell companies make it in, because we've asked for green near the ballpark before. Are all of them?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the prior Asian District Association that had it, green poles.
So we haven't gotten, I don't think we've gotten an application for Asian district. We've gotten one for Lincoln. When the time comes, we'll choose on, what blends in best with where it actually is.
On that point, when you say that they only make it in those 3 different types of finishes, can we encourage them or make something where because if they're going to be making essentially, so are these going to be like every 100 feet? Is that?
No, not necessarily.
What's the minimum distance, or what's the minimum distance that they have to be apart?
I don't know. In downtown, it's my understanding there wouldn't be more than one per block.
Okay.
But to your point, we did ask about the dark green. It's possible that they will change. It is possible that at some point we can leverage them to get more options.
Yeah. Well, my question also, I'm asking, as a design review district, I don't know if we can say that in any way. Is there any? I don't know. Because it's reasonable and objective, that's where.
I mean, I think as far as if we're requiring them to match the existing poles, I think then you could require them that they need to be that same color.
Yeah, but what if they don't make it?
They can.
I realize they can.
Then they can't sell things there. That's where I think, as a design district, we should stand a little bit of our ground on design restrictions, because, we do it with development. Why can't we do it with light poles?
True. We will. The ordinance reads that poles should be the same color, should match the color of other poles located within the same block. So if an application comes in and all the other poles on the same block are green, then we have a lot of leverage to get them to use the green.
Okay.
And if it's a block or an area where there isn't a uniformity, is it just staff discretion at that point, or how?
Yes, I meant to mention in this, the point you're getting to is the ordinance is designed to provide for administrative approval because the Senate bill establishes a timeline by which the approval has to be made. And if it's not made in that time, then it defaults to that it's allowed. So we believed administrative approval was almost, well, two things. One, it was almost the only way to meet the timeline. And two, we hoped to set such objective and clear guidelines that there should be no reason that staff wouldn't be able to approve it. That goes to your point. At the same time, we couldn't declare a single color, and we couldn't go block by block and pre-establish what color should be, so we had to make it a guideline. We had to make it should. Will there be, in the example you described, I mean, there are those examples all over town that we would just pick, it would be what staff believes.
What
You know,
we're
blends in
aspirationally
the
trying to
Yes,
go towards.
exactly. For most areas, it's pretty clear. Will there be places where there's an anomaly? Of course, like the Bricktown pole that we initially suggested be green. When I say we all agreed, it wasn't just staff. We and the cell provider agreed that black would be the least obtrusive because there is a lot of black metal in Bricktown.
Yeah. On that though, like I don't know, because when it says in the same block, like say Classen in the Asian district, you have the center median, which has more of the like galvanized finish for lights. I don't know where their legal side comes in. They could say that through that entire area. Well, green may be there, but there's also this, so we're going to pick the one with resistance, or the one least resistance for them, because they almost could pick a variation. So I'm just like, there could be potentially a lot of these, and they could be, I mean, legally, they can put these very closely together, and this is the most densely populated like areas of the city, and I mean, once we decide this right now, it's just this forever thing. So I say, I'm all for being as strict as possible because it preserves, I mean, this has precedence for so many other things right now, potentially.
And I will say there's a definition for block in the zoning code.
Okay.
So I'm not sure. But I know it's defined.
And to Tyler's point, one side of the street might be different from the other, or the median might be different from the two sidewalks, or I mean, there's a lot of.
Yeah, it's going to be on a, well, I completely agree. I mean, I believe everyone's goals are that it needs to, we actually, when it's all said and done, we need to not even know that they're there, right? So it's something that blends in, whatever that means. Because we're trying to be reasonable and objective and set guidelines that are consistent with all of the other amenities, this guideline about material, finish, and color, it also applies to trash cans, benches, light poles, any of the furniture. So we want it to all coordinate, if not match. I just don't see a way how we can require that something be a specific color, because then there will be variations on that color. What if we got it wrong on what it needs to match? And what if Asian district is, has money to provide new benches. Your benches are red. So I personally believe there needs to be flexibility. I don't think that flexibility will result in an inferior visual product, because I think there are few areas of the city that where it really is monochromatic. That's my personal opinion.
I'm a little less concerned about material finish and color as opposed to co-location and things like that. Can you go back to the picture that you had of the downtown location where y'all had one kind of drawn into the picture? It was very early there. So we're calling these monopoles, so I'm assuming by the name that means that there's not a lot of room for co-location of multiple companies on one pole, right?
Right. We wrote that in there in case an avenue opens up for them to go on traffic signals, which that process currently does not exist.
That was my
or
question.
the OG&E light poles, which
Okay.
that process does currently not exist.
Okay, so that answers my question. So in that picture, the one before that, it's directly, I mean, right on that, it's 2 feet, 5 feet away from another pole. Currently, we can't co-locate that onto the traffic signal pole.
We can't require co-location.
And is that because of the state bill, the state law?
Yes, I don't think there's a spacing requirement, and so I don't think that and they don't have to co-locate on any other person's.
Yeah, and we can't set a minimum distance apart.
But Lisa, was this just an example? Those poles aren't really there together, are they?
Well, okay, this is kind of a bad example. This was a proposed location, but it's in the site distance triangle, so traffic won't approve it, so this will not go there. Last I heard, they were going to put it across the way right here, but...
I'm kind of trying to figure out how much the state has tied our hands here, because to Tyler's point, these are eventually going to be all over the place,
Yes,
I would think.
especially in the more populated urban design districts.
And if our goal is to have them be as invisible and unobtrusive as possible, having some way of encouraging, at least, if not forcing co-location, it seems like it's going to be an inevitable tool that we're going to need at some point. And when I say we, I mean the
Sure.
city, not
Yes,
this
yeah.
group.
It's my understanding we cannot require co-location. And then the city doesn't own most of the light poles. Those are OG&E, so we can't require OG&E to accept co-location. And Public Works and Traffic have other policies about they don't want other entities attaching or working on their equipment, which is the traffic signals.
Okay. And we can't do co-location of two cell companies on the same pole?
They can, but we can't require it.
Okay. And if we can charge a fee for this, right?
There's a fee that's been established just for what we do on all of our other revocable permit fees, I think. I could be wrong on that. I don't have the fee schedule with me, but there is a fee. It's slight.
Yeah, it's not very much.
But it's a one-time fee, not a yearly rent? Okay. So these are not being treated the same as other cell towers where it would be more of a yearly rent situation?
Right, if you're attaching to a building, you're paying the building owner an annual lease.
Yeah.
But these are not that.
Does the city not have any regular cell towers on municipal property?
I don't know.
Sorry.
I'm thinking, I'm not sure.
Okay. I mean, it just seems like a good revenue source for the city that if these things are going to be, populating our streetscapes all over the place, a reasonable rent would be a small price to ask.
Yeah, I do want to touch on something I think you're getting to. Are these going to be everywhere? Yes. And if we can't limit the number per block, we can't set a minimum spacing. What I believe, at least in downtown and in some areas of urban design, I'm thinking Uptown, Plaza, Capitol Hill, is that there's already existing poles, existing benches. There's already a lot of existing stuff in the amenity zone, right? So they'll have to stay X amount away from those, and then they'll have to coordinate with the parallel on-street parking and angled parking. So by the time, and then, like this example of the site distance triangle. So by the time you space out to account for all of those things, I think there will be only a certain amount of locations they can go in. For sure downtown, for sure, I think like Paseo and Uptown. But to me, that's the only way we can possibly control the number, because we can't limit the number.
One other, just kind of when it comes to the location of that, is, so I don't know any of the rules from this, but like there's clearly ADA accessibility, but I don't know if it's one path on, because that's actually a good example, because you're going to run through a lot of intersections with like 5 different things, sometimes even more than that. But say the distance from things, is there definitely in all like circles around it, can a wheelchair get around it at all angles? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Making sure.
Last question, I promise.
Ask away, because I don't want someone coming to me tomorrow saying, because this helps me make sure we've got all our bases covered.
Well, I mean, to me, it also sounds like y'all hands are pretty tied from the state level.
Yes. Yeah, I'm grateful that we can even do this much.
Some lobbyists earned their money on this one. Is there a provision in there? These are going to become antiquated at some point. Is there a provision that they have to be removed so we don't have just, dead poles?
We thought you would ask that. Somebody asked that at downtown the other day, so we did, legal did look up the answer. There is a statute that part of it relates to the abandonment of the small cells. Susan, do you want to speak to it further? Do you want?
It allows us to adopt reasonable and non-discriminatory requirements for the removal. However, we were thinking that we would put that in a different ordinance besides, each design district, because it needs to apply to citywide. And they're considered to be abandoned if they have not operated for a continuous period of 12 months or more. And we have to give them notice, and then they have 90 days receipt of that notice to remove the abandoned pole. And if they don't, then the city can remove it, it becomes ours, and then we can charge them for the fee of our removal.
I just want to go back to the areas that are not in design districts. Does this ordinance grant these design districts teeth to the extent of just color and materials, and that's it? So would I be wrong in assuming that they would receive an automatic approval as long as they were outside of these areas?
Outside of design review, they still have to go through the revocable permit process. So in that process, it gets reviewed by traffic, utilities, public works, and those entities can make comments like this one. Traffic said, well, that's in the sight distance triangle, so you can't have it there. Utilities may say, oh, well, there's a water main there, you can't have it there, so on and so forth. So it does get reviewed. It's not a blanket approval. They're under the same timeline.
There's not going to be anybody at the staff counter that says, you want to put this wooden pole in this district that, is not a recognized district, but we're going to allow you to do it because we don't have any teeth to enforce you to do anything else.
Is it similar to OG&E transformers?
No, it still has to get a revocable permit. Trying to think of a good example of something else outside of design review. There are no design criteria outside of design review. There still are practical concerns with the revocable about utilities, traffic, ADA accessibility. All that is checked at the revocable permit stage. So it wouldn't be, as far as the latest I understand, it couldn't be just a staff counter approval, because it has to circulate to several departments before it's determined to be approved.
But as it pertains to design, so if you have like the Britain district where we spend a lot of time at, which is going through a revitalization, and there's efforts to beautify it and even streetscape efforts, but it's not recognized as a design district. So it sounds like there's not going to be anybody or any staff that is going to champion for design characteristics that would be in line with that district simply because it doesn't receive the protection of this ordinance.
Correct, because there are no design guidelines for Britain. Yep.
So Lisa, is there no mechanism for the city to say, if you're going to put one of these anywhere in the city, it should match the adjacent poles?
Color, material, and finish are design guidelines that are unique, for the most part, are unique to the design review district, so.
Even when it comes to telephone poles and things like, and light poles, there's no citywide standards for?
There may be, well, I don't know this, I'm in the boat, I'm literally practicing a bubble. Public Works may have standards to be matched. I would not know what those are. I can find out, but I don't know what they are.
One last question is, a while ago we mentioned that there's guidelines for putting it per block. Is there any established guidelines to distance or define block?
A block is defined in the zoning code, yeah.
Okay.
I did look at to see how much the fee is in the right-of-way, and it's $20 a year. So.
And the city made the decision that we weren't even going to attempt to collect it. Is that correct?
No, I'm not aware of that.
At the January training, I was under the impression that the city's approach was that it was such a minuscule amount of money that we weren't even going to. It would cost us more administratively to try to collect it than the money we'd actually receive from it.
I don't remember that conversation. We planning don't collect it. It would be, I assume, Public Works, but I don't know how they collect it.
And is there a reason that we wrote this ordinance to only apply to design districts as opposed to everywhere in the city?
Because design districts already have design, well, one, because your purview is a design district, so that's your purview, that's my purview, and there are already existing guidelines, design guidelines for other things in the design review district, so it's easy to insert. It's not that it's easy, it's just there's a place to put it. But I don't even know where the place to put this stuff would be for the other zoning districts.
It may be the Planning Commission. They often hear requests about signs, which is, a lot of them are on a pole and they can only be certain size. So I'm just guessing, but I would think the Planning Commission, either through their ordinance, their plan, could, if they wanted to, make it citywide.
Yeah, yes. It's technically possible to establish something citywide, absolutely.
Fall into the bulk standards or some standard ordinance?
Somewhere in the subdivision regs.
So would that be something that we need to take into consideration today when making a recommendation to the Planning Commission?
Like to recommend that design guidelines be extended to other...
Exactly.
I believe you could just kind of make that as a recommendation to Planning Commission to see where it goes from there. But they would have to ask staff to develop where that goes. So they wouldn't be able to immediately act on it. But that would be a cue to them that you believe it's important. I heard almost identical comments at downtown. Tony was there. I heard almost identical comments. I had a meeting last month, because I wasn't here at this meeting, because I was meeting with the stockyards not the Stockyards Urban Design Committee, but they have the Stockyards Main Street has a design committee, and I met with them a month ago, and they had very similar comments. But one thing from that meeting was to make sure when I'm describing the not interfering with parking was that I specifically recognize angled parking, because that's what Stockyards is, and that's what Paseo is.
I was just going to clarify one thing on the $20. That's by statute that they can do that in the right of way, but they still are paying our administrative fee for a revocable permit and for the CA, so they do have to pay those administrative fees.
So they negotiated the rent at the state level across the board? It's predetermined within that 1388 Senate
I
bill?
believe that's right, that it's $20 max for, I guess, being in the right of way.
Okay.
But like I say, they are paying, since we're requiring them to go through revocable and through a design review, they do pay those administrative fees.
I'm not sure question, like with that, acting on that, what if like two carriers shared one pole? Would they pay two separate fees, or would that be split between two carriers?
I believe they would each pay a fee, right?
Something tells me that one carrier is charging the other more than $20 a year.
Sure.
Other municipalities that are dealing with this, are any of them establishing ordinances or standards that are different than what we're discussing today?
I don't know. I haven't looked to see what anyone else is doing. But I do remember when the bill was working its way through the session last year that some municipalities wanted to just ban it outright and not make any provisions for these, and that was their position. So they weren't even thinking about the potential for design guidelines. Some, like us, were like, hey, if we get any choice in this, we'll be happy. And then some were like, we don't care. The more cell coverage, the better. So I don't know exactly how people have followed up since then.
In the event that the Planning Commission decides that, this ordinance should really apply exclusively to design districts, does this automatically protect design districts that may be established subsequently? Would they automatically receive the benefits of this ordinance?
I'll use Britain as an example, if that's okay. If Britain is designated a design district, staff will work with Britain stakeholders and property owners, and we'll develop specific design guidelines first of all, establish a boundary, we'll establish design guidelines. They most likely will be based off of other urban design districts, which at that time will include the small cells. So we can tweak them, at least affirm them and tweak them. But that'll be a process also.
Another comment on this, I would assume that of the three, just thinking of right now, they have a certain amount of options of different lights that they can do. Is there any way look-wise we actually could just say, you can't do a wood one in a design district? Because there's some caveats here that they maybe could throw up some wood ones if we'd be like, oh, this is worse than anything.
They could, but we, in historic preservation areas and in some urban design areas, urban design/downtown near the apartments south of Cottage District, there was a case there, and some in HP areas where wood was the least obtrusive thing. So we did not want to blanket eliminate wood.
Another question is, so you mentioned earlier in no other municipalities, has there been other studies in other cities that these cell towers has worked, and how does that ordinance work? Has there been any studies, further studies on that?
Have I studied how other municipalities' ordinances address these? No. No, I've been focused on how, as quickly as possible, how can we get enough guidelines to review against that are consistent with the Senate bill.
And some other states have different state statutes that may not have preempted them as much as Oklahoma.
Right.
Also.
If we don't have any other discussion, we could entertain a motion. We need, if we want, to recommend this to the Planning Commission. We could also add some language, if somebody wants to propose that the Planning Commission consider applying this citywide.
Yeah, I would just ask that be two separate motions.
Okay.
So this goes from here to Planning Commission with recommendations from all of the different designs, and then it goes to City Council after that? Or?
Yes. Yeah, Planning Commission will make a recommendation to City Council.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to recommend approval of the ordinance amendment relating to small cell towers to the Planning Commission.
We have a motion by Blatt. Do we have a second?
Second.
A second by Charnico. All of those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And I would also entertain any additional motions to be sent along with this, if anybody has interest in doing that.
I motion to have the design and color match light poles in certain districts, certain design districts, and match as closely as possible. Kind of recommendation.
Well, let me restate that, and just to make sure we have it correctly. So it's a motion by Nguyen to have the poles for the cell phone equipment match the light poles as closely as possible in color.
And other amenities in that design district.
So we can't pick on the poles specifically. So could we make a broader recommendation that amenities match the adjacent amenities across the municipality versus just a pole?
So I understand you're saying not the pole, but any amenity match, light poles, but then you said across the municipality. So are you talking about expanding this beyond design districts?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think it would address the concerns in Britain. It would address the concerns that anybody might have in their neighborhood.
Okay.
From having a black pole where you might have predominantly, aluminum. So it's really about expanding what's already been written and having it apply across the community rather than just the design districts. Okay. It should be worded a little more articulately, but that's the gist of it.
I think that's too different from the original motion that I think if you agree, I would just...
I agree to Horace.
Okay.
So now I have to remember what I said. So I guess I would propose that we recommend that the provisions that have been outlined for the design districts be expanded to cover the entire city of Oklahoma City.
All right. We have a motion by Charnico. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second by Guillory. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, that motion passes.
I do want to say one more thing. In our time working with the telecommunications providers, they've always been happy to at least listen to us on the justification for the color and the placement on. We've probably processed close to 20 of these applications in downtown, And every time we've called and said, hey, can you move this a little bit this way? Can you make this one black? Can you move it back? Every time they have, because, they don't care what color it is. They don't care if it's one foot or the other. So, I just want to point out that it's not, I do believe we have a working relationship, and it's not going to be blanket approval for them to do whatever. And I've seen them working with individual property owners when property owners weren't completely happy with exactly where it is, that they've made some accommodations. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Lisa. We do have several communications. Item 8A, does anyone have any questions for staff about these? Moving on, do we have any comments from planning staff?
No.
No comments? Any comments from commissioners? All right, our next meeting will be June 26th, and we are adjourned.